Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for attending our webinar this afternoon. We're going to be continuing our series on managing the time shift, which is based on my books, Time Shift, The Experience of Dimensional Change, and The Reality of Time. We have been running a teleconference course over the past 12 weeks or so to investigate this topic, and this webinar that we're doing this afternoon is an extension of other webinar sessions we've done over the past 6 months. So you'll be able to catch up on all the information if you would like by just getting in touch with us at Time Portal Publications or timeportalpubs.com. So as we've been discussing, the matter of time is very important in really having an analysis of the current state of events that we're experiencing on a global level and also in the different countries that all of us reside in. And this is because the character of time is actually changing. Now, when we understand the nature of time, we realize that time has a subjective component, which means that it's very different in our own psychological state. And I think we all can recognize that because as we go through the different personal events in our lives, sometimes we feel like time is moving very slowly. Sometimes it feels very quick. And sometimes it feels like it's incredibly quick to the point that it doesn't even feel like time has really amassed itself at all. And so this feeling of subjective time, which is so important in our personal understanding, this is also affecting us on a global level too. So as different events present themselves, they start to feel like they're building up one on top of the other, kind of like building blocks in order to build something new or different that seems to be presenting itself. And this is what we've been noticing in the current events. So as each day goes by and different appearances of events seem to come about, and not only events that we perceive as good or bad, but just events unto themselves, things that are happening, we find that it's not so easy to catch up with everything. And a lot of people have been experiencing anxiety because they feel like time is moving too quickly for them to really comprehend the meaning of what is happening. And after a while, people start to report that they actually feel kind of numb, that they're not really being able to react to everything that's presenting itself because there's just too much to work with emotionally. And there's this sense that perhaps nothing that we do or say or feel is going to have any significant impact on what is occurring. So one of the reasons that I wanted to do this webinar this afternoon is to try to help us understand this phenomenon and perhaps to change it in such a way that we all feel more comfortable, able to sleep better, less anxious, and more awake to the significance of what is going on. So many of us have known really for a very long time that there was going to be a shift during this period. And many of us expected that the shift would actually be a shift in consciousness to the point where there'd be some very strong realization, understanding, or change in the way things are functioning. So we would know that all the work that we've done all these years is starting to pay off. And I think what is causing a lot of anxiety for people is they're not really experiencing that. They're feeling like there's something that isn't happening, that they want to see happening. And I think that that feeling that people are having is because they're not really recognizing some of the major changes that are occurring. So over the past 6 months, one of the big changes that I believe is very significant is how people are viewing what happens to women. And this idea of the Me Too movement, the whole thing that has gone on around that, although maybe we have different feelings about what this means, essentially what is happening is that we see women coming to the fore. We see women taking their power in a way that is very new or different. And they feel more comfortable being able to express very deep concerns about what has happened to them in their lives. And even though many of us who are women of a certain age have worked in the women's movement, like myself, for 40 or 50 years now, there's something very different going on. Because first of all, it's cross-generational. So we see this from very young girls all the way to older women. And people are realizing that even though some of these things that have happened to women happened a very long time ago, they're just getting to the point where they feel enough courage and enough stability to be able to express feelings about sexual abuse, inequality, harassment, sexual crimes. So this is actually very new, to be a mass consciousness shift of this magnitude. And personally, I feel very, very happy about that and rewarded in terms of all the work that I have been involved with and other people have been involved with over a long stretch of time. So this tells us that there's something unique going on in the temporal codes and what is happening now in terms of how time is expressing itself. And it's actually making more room for information to be disclosed. So this notion that time can be stretched and that more room can be had, if you will, in the box of time, and making it possible for people to come out and disclose very personal and private information that would be very difficult before to disclose. This is part of the change in the character of time. So over many, many millennia, while very many behaviors that have not been really complementary or helpful to women have been occurring, there has been an amassment of other types of temporal information. And that temporal information has been more suppressive. It's been more contractive. It hasn't allowed for that kind of expansion. But every so often in history, we see this massive shift, and we see that women are now at the forefront of that shift. And this is incredibly important. It can't be overemphasized. So when women come out and they speak some of the things that they're saying, I know that it can be very, very shocking, because those of us that really want to feel the soul of humanity and to understand that inside every human being is a great goodness, a great clarity. We really don't want to entertain the idea that everybody not only isn't perfect, but there are parts of ourselves that are not always visible to others. And I think that for women, for many, many years, when we have been close to men, we understand that there are parts of men that maybe have not felt safe to be expressed. And one of those parts is anger. Now, why would women feel sensitive to male anger? I think this is the key of the matter. I think it's really very easy for women to understand why men feel angry, because a lot of the burden of making an income and protecting a family and creating opportunities for education for a family and all the financial pressures that men feel fall upon men in such a way that a lot of times they feel that they don't have any spaciousness in their life, and there's a kind of contractedness and bitterness that starts to arise. And when women are close to men, they try to ameliorate that. They try to be kind. They try to be loving. They try to be caring towards men and be able to create some type of a balance. But we have been putting more and more and more pressure in this direction. Not only that, but, you know, in my mother's time, hardly any women actually worked for a living outside of the home. And in many ways, women weren't allowed to work outside the home. My mother told me when she was growing up that women who were teachers were not even allowed to be married in Massachusetts. So what women did is that all of their inner desires, their needs, their feelings of wanting to exert themselves in the world were quite suppressed. And so they moved a lot of that energy towards the men that they were supporting, loving, and serving. But then it got to a point in the entire global culture where that simply wasn't working anymore, because the need for the intelligence of women, which we don't actually know, in my opinion, frankly, what the potential of the intelligence of women actually is yet, because it's been so suppressed, it's been so brought down over many, many years that we don't really know what that's actually going to look like eventually. But I think we have some ideas about that. And one of the ideas is that the emotions and the way that emotions are processed in relationship to the intellect, that whole area is going to change. And it's going to be possible for that divine feminine quality, which has more sensitivity, more compassion, more intuition, more, if you will, psychic abilities, more ability to look into the psyche or feelings or auric field of another human being or other sentient life, that women possess a lot of attributes that are going to bring themselves into the fore as this shift occurs. So because that development of the divine feminine is so important, we're also seeing the shadow of that emerging right now in the present administration in the United States, in behavior that we see exhibited on a cultural level. So we're seeing the polarities, we're seeing the destruction, if you will, of what some people feel is the previous masculine understanding about the nature of reality. And we have a rise of the feminine with the possibility of a new understanding. And somehow those two energies need to integrate. So it's not that we're going to be eliminating the old one entirely, but what we need to do is try to incorporate the attributes of both in some kind of process that will be really advantageous for human development. So in my opinion, we're not quite at the full turning point of this process, but we're getting closer. And you can tell that we're getting closer because what we see in the entire fabric of the culture is very rapid, intense event structures emerging. Like I said, one after the other. Scandal, if you will, things coming out to the surface, incredible, amazing investigative reporting that is bringing out information that has been really under the surface for a long time. And every time that a woman does stand up and express her experience and what has happened to her and why it's happened and why she has not spoken out earlier and what that has meant in her life and how that's affected her and how it's affected her children, her grandchildren. This is how the change is expressing itself at the moment. And this is very, very powerful. We can't really give it enough emphasis to really understand the significance of what is happening. And as this occurs, And the character of time is changing. What it's allowing is that because that feminine energy is coming into everyone's energy field, not just women, but men too, what is happening is that the capacity for people to have permission to express their feelings, their softer part of life, their intuition, their perception, and even a different kind of humor that is coming forward is going to give everybody permission to create a different type of culture. So as this occurs, and the character of time is shifted, there are going to be some moments where people feel that sense of overwhelm, but they're also going to feel something else. They're going to feel more silence, more continuity, more of a feeling of the ground of being real underneath them, more of a feeling that the significance of their own life and their own personal story is much more valuable. Now, you would think that everyone would feel that their story is valuable, but actually, a lot of times, unless one is a very famous person, one doesn't recognize the value of one's own personal event story and all the different attributes that arise out of that. And we tend to give value only to people who are famous, are celebrities, are people that seem to have some great physical beauty or some great physical talent. And we diminish our own experience of who we are, what we're about, and why we're here. So part of the change is to be able to see this intrinsic and beautiful value of each human being. And that is why we have to change the way that we have been treating women, because we're not honoring that intrinsic value. And it can't even be honored in men properly unless it's also honored in women. So this is why the change is taking place. And as this occurs, what's going to start to happen is that people are going to drop away from feeling that essentially the intellect, that dry intellect, devoid of feeling, separate from how the heart is experienced, that is going to change. And people are going to start to need to use their heart as a form of intelligence. So as we hear the wounds that women are describing and other oppressed people are describing, things that are happening for them or have happened to them, what that does is it allows the heart to open up and to be revealed. And so it's no longer concealed underneath the mantle of that intellect. And the intellect is starting to listen to the heart and pay attention to the heart. And so when words are said, when words are offered, we're actually saying to ourselves, you know, those words were too hurtful. We don't feel comfortable with those words. They're not words that we would use with our children or our grandchildren. And so if you're going to use those words in a public format, we don't want this. Somehow this is desecrating the whole structure of language. And certainly political structures are being desecrated by the way that language is being used. And by bringing this to the fore, we all understand now that we have to be more sensitive with our language. We have to feel, think. We have to try to recognize that what we say is going to have a profound impact on other people. And we can't just say things just for the sake of feeling a sense that what we believe or feel is right. We have to look at the effect that it's having on another person or a group of people And we have to be more conscious about how we're expressing ourselves. So yes, this is putting a lot of pressure on politicians, on actors, on people in the public to be more conscious about the use of language. That is true. But what is also happening is that we are going to construct new language, new ways of expressing things. Because actually, our understanding of how to develop the intellect needs to be dipped into that very, very fine level of heart value and come back out again in a much more sensitive, clear, and loving way. But because many of us have experienced so much woundedness in our lifetimes, and not just women, men too, because of that diminishment of feeling and people's inability to see into our hearts, to see into our souls, to see what our needs are, to see what our feelings are, to see what our fears are. Because of that diminishment and because of the pain that that has caused, when other people come forward now and express their pain and say what is happening to them, it's very triggering for people. It creates anxiety. It causes people to not feel safe because there's so much information of this nature that is being brought forward. And it's almost as if it's too much. We're on overload. We have to turn off the video, turn off the television. We can't really sometimes take in the amount of information that's being generated. And we're noticing its effect, as I was saying. So we look at the face of a woman and we realize, that something that has happened has affected her whole life, and that maybe she didn't know that her husband is doing something or creating this kind of behavior. And I'm seeing this in my practice too, that the whole emergence of people's understanding about these things is very much affecting people's personal lives. And so as we come forward and we try to understand this time period, as I've discussed in previous recordings that we've made, that in my opinion, how time actually creates events is that information comes from the future and folds back into the present. So if you think about that, that means that there must be some very important information, particularly about women and men and gender and sexuality. There must be some very important information that's being transmitted to us from the future that we are being asked to begin to assimilate. And this is what we're really trying to understand. Now, personally, I also feel that this is in preparation for meeting other sentient species. And the reason I'm saying that is because other sentient species don't have such highly striated gender differences in many respects. And so in order for us to greet another species, we're going to have to open our hearts and open our minds and try to understand what it would be like to not have our ego structure so embedded in our gender, and to change the way we feel about what it means to be a man or a woman. So this is why I believe that this information is coming to the fore now. And this is being fed to us, I also feel, from the future. So when we look into the future and we see how society will operate, and we see the kinds of roles that people are going to play, that we will begin to understand that this very rigid value structure that we've created, which actually over the past 10 or 15 years in some ways, it has not made such great strides. And one of the reasons for that is because rather than men kind of coming into that more intuitive value of intelligence and adopting that in business and so forth, what we've mostly seen is women trying to stuff themselves into all those old models. And many of us who have tried to do that, it creates a lot of tension and it creates a lot of constrictedness. And again, it doesn't allow for the temporal expansion, for that change in the way time is being actually metabolized by the society. I personally was very encouraged seeing the opening ceremonies of the Olympics just the past few days, because you can see that the Korean people are trying to have a reckoning with exactly what it is that I'm describing. And that's when you saw the beautiful yin-yang symbols. You saw a lot of this kind of merger between technology and spirit and trying to bring that forward. Because right now, a lot of the technology that we're seeing does not incorporate any female intelligence whatsoever in most cases, in my opinion. It's strictly technical without the intuitive. So to change that, we're going to have to create completely new technology that is very, very different than what we have now. And I think that we're really in the very beginning stages of that. So when technology is actually being used to enhance creativity so that people can have more original thinking and be able to create a softness in their understanding about other people and situations, and feel more unlimited, not just in how much information that they can accumulate, but in the quality of that information, we're going to develop a different style of communication with each other. And we really don't have very many models of what this looks like, I don't feel. I'm kind of a big science fiction fan, but I don't really see in science fiction as it's presently being offered, I don't really see what is really going to happen. In other words, what I believe in my inner vision is going to happen is not yet finding its way into books and video and so forth. Not yet. I do think it will, but not quite yet. And that's because it's really very difficult for all of us, as I said, to change the way that we think about intelligence itself. So we need to understand that in the universe, there is what we would think of as a pure field of sentience. And that field of sentience is directly connected to the pure field of time. So how do we know that something is sentient? Well, usually when we're evaluating sentience, we think about sentience as thinking, and thinking therefore involves concept, and concept involves something that seems to have a fixity to it. But actually, when you think about pure thinking, pure sentience, it's not that it's non-conceptual entirely, but it's not locked into concept as the only means of generating intelligence. And this, I think, is the key. Because when you talk to women, like you just sit down in a room, in a restaurant, someplace, in a gathering, you usually notice that the women are not there memorizing all the facts, what we think of as facts at the moment. Every single piece of data, everything that has happened, exactly what's going on. That's not how women usually construct an understanding of their reality. For women, a lot of the events that take place are feeling events. They're psychological events, and the feelings associated with that, and the insights generated by that. That's really how women accumulate intelligence over a lifetime. Now, I'm not saying that we as women cannot memorize equations or to understand very technical information that we presently have. I'm not saying that that is not something that a lot of women are interested in. But still, the way that the information is being generated and how it's being stored, it's not using female intelligence very well. Because if we were able to grasp the way the mind works, and we were able to express it mathematically, but to express it non-conceptually, if mathematics had the capacity, like I say in Time Shift, to become symbiotic, to move in the direction of being able to express feeling thought in such a way that it could actually increase the capacity of intelligence in an entirely new way and be able to generate this depth of intuition so that people were highly sensitized to one another and how they might be affecting one another. And if technology was able to describe that and to enhance that and to create technology that actually not only was compassionate in the traditional sense that we think of now, but actually increases compassion itself and changes the value and structure of loving kindness, that would be something. And it would probably make it impossible to do some of the things that we're doing now on the earth and the way that we're hurting our own planet. Because when you see someone going about something that is highly self-destructive, usually you realize this isn't good. It's not good that this person is being self-destructive. I'm going to try to intervene with that. I want to influence this person so that they will not do something that's self-destructive. Well, when advanced civilizations look at us now and they see the amount of self-destructive behavior that we're generating on every front, in every possible and conceivable way, how much respect are they going to have for that? How much, understanding of that? Well, they do have understanding. And the understanding is just like when you see someone being self-destructive, you think, oh, that's very sad. That person must not be very well, that they would engage in self-destructive behavior. And that's exactly what advanced civilizations feel like. We're not very well. And we're not. So in order to move into a situation where everything that we are developing technologically is going to be truly for the advancement of the planet, that will support the way in which the planet is moving. It will support the change in climate. It will support all of the different types of education that need to be generated to build something new. When we start to develop that type of intelligence and that type of technology, which I personally feel will probably be led by women, it doesn't mean that men won't be taking part in that, but what will start to happen is that what we think of as important now, what we think of as really valuable now, is going to shift or to change. And we're going to start seeing children, young people particularly, much more interested in being educated, perhaps not resorting to drugs and alcohol and other abusive behaviors in the way that they are now. And they're going to want to involve themselves in this development of a new form of education. And this is what I feel is so important in terms of bringing about the change in consciousness that all of us are really hoping for. So thank you.